When the lawyer read my ex-wife's will, my son sat there with a grin so wide, you'd think he'd just hit the Powerball jackpot. He looked over at me with pure, unadulterated pity, the kind of look you give a stray dog before you kick it into the rain. "You get nothing, Dad," he leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Not a single red cent. Go on back to your little rental." He was right about the rental. On paper, I was just a broke ex-husband, and he was right about that too. But when it came to who was actually holding the cards, he couldn't have been more wrong. Because when the lawyer read the very next sentence, the smile vanished from my son's face faster than his credit score. "My name is Thomas Blackwood. I'm 68 years old. This is the story of how I taught my ungrateful son a lesson he'd never forget. The man who builds the bridge is the only one who knows how to tear it down." If you've ever underestimated by your own flesh and blood, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from today. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The rain at the cemetery was cold, but it had nothing on the look my son, Brandon, gave me as I tried to step closer to the casket. He took a step forward, blocking my path. "Front row is for family, Thomas," he said. He didn't call me Dad. He hadn't called me Dad in 5 full years. Ever since he decided that a retired engineer living in a small apartment didn't fit the shiny, high-flying image he was trying to project as a rising marketing executive. He gestured with a leather-gloved hand toward the back of the crowd, past the business associates, past the distant relatives, past the people who only knew Catherine for her wealth. "You can stand back by the gate," Brandon said. "Try not to make a scene. Tiffany is going live for her followers." I looked over at Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was standing right at the edge of the grave, holding a black lace umbrella in one hand and her phone in the other, posing. She was actually posing next to my ex-wife's resting place, adjusting her angles to make sure her waterproof mascara caught the light just right for maximum effect. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I just nodded and walked to the very back. I stood under an oak tree and watched them lay to rest the woman I'd loved for 40 years. Catherine and I got divorced 10 years ago, but it wasn't because the love was gone. It was a business decision, a strategic move to protect her assets during a massive lawsuit that nearly wiped out her company. We stayed legally divorced because it was safer that way. We lived apart to keep up appearances. But every single Sunday, she would come over to my little place for coffee. Every major decision she made, she ran by me first. Brandon didn't know any of this. He only saw the surface. He saw a multi-millionaire real estate mogul mother and a father driving a 10-year-old beat-up pickup truck. When the service wrapped up and the crowd began to disperse, Tiffany strutted over to me, her heels sinking into the wet grass. She didn't look broken-hearted at all. She just looked annoyed. She pulled a heavy, cream-colored envelope from her designer bag and shoved it into my chest. "This is for you, Tom," she said. I took it. It felt heavy. For a second, I thought maybe it was a final letter Catherine had left behind for me, something she'd trusted them to pass along. I opened it right there in the rain. It wasn't a letter. It was a legal notice, a notice to vacate. An eviction order. I read the words. "You are hereby required to vacate the premises at 42 Oak Street within 72 hours. I looked up. Brandon had stepped up beside his wife, a faint sneer playing on his lips. "That apartment is part of the estate now, Dad," Brandon said. "And as the sole heir, I've decided to liquidate the property. You've got 3 days. 3 days. I felt the keys in my pocket. Years ago, Catherine bought that small apartment building under a shell company and let me live there rent-free. It was our quiet, hidden meeting spot. "You're evicting me at her funeral?" I asked. My voice was calm. So calm it surprised even me. "We just want to rip the Band-Aid off," Tiffany piped up. "Besides, that apartment is in a prime location. We can flip it and make $500,000 easily. You know how business works, right, Tom?" "Oh, wait. No, you don't. That's why you're broke." She let out a short, nasty laugh. Brandon put a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was heavy and dismissive. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dad. Mom is gone. Her charity work ended with her. You've got 3 days to pack up your junk. If you're not out by Friday, I'm calling the authorities. Oh, and don't bother showing up for the reading of the will tomorrow. You'll only embarrass yourself." He patted my shoulder twice, then turned away. "Come on, babe," he said to Tiffany. "We have dinner reservations." I watched them walk off, strutting like they owned the world. They climbed into Brandon's rented Porsche and sped away, splashing mud onto my shoes. I was left standing alone in the graveyard. I looked at the eviction notice one more time, then over at Catherine's headstone. I pulled my phone out. An old model with a cracked screen, exactly what you'd expect a penniless old man to carry. I dialed a number from memory. "Mr. Prescott," I said. The voice on the other end was sharp and precise. "Thomas, I take it they made their move?" "Yeah," I replied. Handed me an eviction notice right at the grave. There was a moment of silence, followed by a low, cold chuckle. "Classic Brandon," Prescott said. "Are we greenlit for tomorrow?" "Green light," I said. "Initiate phase 1. And Prescott? Turn the AC up in that conference room. I want them uncomfortable." I hung up and walked out of the cemetery. I didn't go back to the apartment to pack. I walked into a small diner, ordered a black coffee, and sat there for 3 full hours, just thinking. I wasn't thinking about where I'd sleep next. I was thinking about a set of numbers I had memorized. $28 million. That was the total value of Catherine's estate. But there were other numbers Brandon didn't know about. 4 million, the total gambling debt Brandon had racked up across 3 different venues in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. 450, Sisso. The credit card debt Tiffany accumulated buying handbags and shoes to keep up her online influencer lifestyle. And 100. The combined IQ of the two of them, which still wasn't enough to see what was coming. They thought they were the top dogs. They didn't realize they were just termites chewing on the foundation, completely unaware that the roof was about to collapse right over their heads. The next morning, I walked into the law offices of Prescott and Associates, a towering building of glass and steel. I wore my best suit, 15 years old, a little tight in the shoulders, with slightly frayed cuffs. I wanted to look every bit the desperate, grieving ex-husband they expected to see. The receptionist didn't even want to let me in. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Thomas Blackwood." She checked the roster. "I don't see you on the VIP list for the Blackwood estate reading." "I'm not a VIP," I said. "I'm the father." She sighed and picked up the phone. A moment later, Mr. Prescott walked out himself. Prescott was a shark in a 3-piece suit. He'd been Catherine's attorney for 30 years. He knew where every body was buried because he'd helped us dig the holes. "Let him in," Prescott said. I walked into the conference room. It was massive, featuring a long mahogany table that could seat 20 people. At the far end, Brandon and Tiffany were already lounging around like they were at a party. Brandon was holding a glass of scotch. At 10 in the morning. Tiffany was scrolling through her phone, her feet propped up on an empty chair. When Brandon saw me walk in, he let out an exaggerated groan. "I told you not to come, Dad," he said. "God, do you have any self-respect left? You look like a raccoon digging through a trash can." I pulled a metal folding chair out from the corner and sat near the door, far away from them. "I just want to hear her final wishes," I said softly. "Her wish was for you to get out of the picture," Tiffany snapped. "That's why she divorced you. Honestly, it's pathetic. Can we speed this up? We have a real estate agent meeting us at the mansion at noon." Mr. Prescott took his seat at the head of the table, placing a thick leather binder in front of him. He adjusted his glasses, looked at Brandon, looked at Tiffany, and then looked over at me. "Hollis." His face was stone cold. "We are gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of Catherine Blackwood," Prescott began, skipping the pleasantries and jumping straight to the assets. "The estate includes the primary residence on Highland Avenue, valued at $4.5 million. The Aspen Vacation Home, valued at $3.2 million. The vintage car collection, valued at $1.8 million. And liquid assets, stocks, and bonds, totaling approximately $18.5 million. Total estimated net value of the estate, $28 million. Brandon let out a low whistle, clinking his glass against Tiffany's water bottle. 28 big ones, baby, he whispered. "We're buying the yacht." Tiffany's eyes went wide, her whole body trembling with excitement. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she spent the money, probably picking out custom interiors for a private jet. Prescott cleared his throat. "To my ex-husband, Thomas Blackwood, I leave the sum of $0. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "You hear that, old man? Nothing. $0. It's right there in black and white." Tiffany broke out laughing, a sharp, grating sound. "You wasted cab fare just to get here, Tom. You should have listened to us." I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, looking down at the floor as my shoulders slumped. Prescott waited for them to finish celebrating before turning the page. In the quiet room, the sound of the paper flipping echoed loudly. "However," Prescott read, his voice rising slightly. Brandon froze, his glass hovering mid-air. "However? He asked. "However," Prescott continued, "all assets, including real estate, vehicles, and liquid accounts, are to be immediately transferred into the Catherine Blackwood Protective Trust." "A trust?" Brandon stood up. "What trust? We never talked about a trust. I'm the executor. I'm her son." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," Prescott said, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. Brandon slowly sank back into his chair. "The trust," Prescott read, "is designed to ensure the long-term preservation of the estate. The beneficiary of this trust is Brandon Blackwood." Brandon let out a massive sigh of relief, leaning back in his seat. "Okay, fine. You scared me for a second. So the money is in a trust. Big deal. Just write me the check. How do I draw from it?" "You don't," Prescott said. "What do you mean?" "You cannot access the trust, Mr. Blackwood. It is a discretionary entity, meaning the assets are controlled entirely by a single trustee. As the beneficiary, you have zero direct access to the capital. You cannot sell properties, you cannot leverage the assets for loans, and you cannot leverage the assets for loans. You get only what the trustee chooses to disperse." Brandon's face flushed deep red. "Who is the trustee?" he demanded. "Is it you, Prescott? Because if it is, you're fired. I'll hire my own lawyer, and we'll break this stupid trust in a week." "It isn't me," Prescott said smoothly. "Then who is it?" Tiffany shrieked. "Who controls our money?" Prescott closed the leather binder and removed his glasses. He extended a single finger, pointing toward the back of the room. Toward the folding chair, right at me. "The sole trustee, with absolute and final control over every single penny, is Thomas Blackwood." A deafening silence fell over the room, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out in an instant. Brandon turned his head very slowly, staring at me like he was trying to solve a complex math problem written in a foreign language. "Him?" Brandon whispered, utterly dumbfounded. "My dad? The guy who cuts coupons for cat food?" "Precisely," Prescott replied. "Your father controls the house you live in. He controls the car you drive. He controls the bank accounts. If you want to buy a pack of gum, Mr. Blackwood, you'll need to submit a formal request for your father's approval." "No!" Tiffany screamed, leaping to her feet. "This is a joke. This is a sick joke. He's a nobody. He's broke." Catherine hated him. "Clearly, she didn't," I said. I stood up, pushing the folding chair aside. I wasn't slumping anymore. I stood tall, unbuttoned my worn suit jacket, and rebuttoned it neatly. Then, I walked up to the conference table. Brandon watched me approach, looking genuinely terrified. "Dad," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Dad, look. We were just joking earlier. You know that, right? The eviction thing. That was just stress talking. Grieving affects everyone differently." I ignored him, walking right past his seat to take the chair at the head of the table. Prescott stood up and stepped aside to give me the seat. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. I settled into the leather executive chair. It was comfortable, a perfect fit. I opened the binder, skipping the will entirely and turning straight to the second tab, labeled Liabilities. I put on my reading glasses, not the cheap drugstore pair I used around them, but my real prescription glasses. "Let's see what we have here," I said, pulling out a document. "Brandon, it says here you owe $1.2 million to the Emerald Casino in Las Vegas, plus another 800,000 to a private lending group in Chicago, a group notorious for enforcing their debts very aggressively." Brandon's face drained of all color. How do you have that?" I pulled out another sheet. "And Tiffany," I continued, 5 maxed-out credit cards, plus a second mortgage taken out on your parents' house by forging their signatures. That's a serious offense, my dear." Tiffany stopped shrieking. She collapsed back into her chair, utterly speechless. "Here's how things are going to work," I said, my voice hardening. It was the tone I used back when I managed construction crews on skyscraper sites. The voice of a man who knew how to lay foundations strong enough to hold millions of tons of steel. "As trustee, I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets of this trust. Bailing out your gambling debts and funding luxury shopping sprees do not qualify as prudent investments." "Dad, please," Brandon pleaded, stammering over his words. "The guys in Chicago, if I don't pay them by the 1st of the month, they said they're going to come after me. You have to release the funds. It's $28 million. This is pocket change." "Request denied," I said flatly. "What?" "Request denied," I repeated. "I'm not using a single cent of Catherine's money to cover up your mistakes." "You can't do this," Brandon roared, slamming his fist on the table. "That's my money. That's my inheritance." "It's my decision," I corrected him. Brandon's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. It was ugly. The face of a spoiled child who had never been told no in his entire life. He lunged across the table, reaching out to grab me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even move. Before he could lay a finger on me, two burly men in black suits stepped out from the side office. I had hired them earlier that morning. One of them grabbed Brandon by the collar of his expensive suit and hauled him back into his chair with ease. "Sit down." The security guard growled softly. Brandon gasped for air, looking back and forth between the guard and me. "You brought security to a will reading?" "I learned from the best," I said. "If you could serve me an eviction notice at a funeral, I figured I should come prepared." Tiffany was crying now. Not the delicate, picture-perfect tears she squeezed out at the cemetery, but ugly, hysterical sobbing, with mascara running down her face. "Tom, please," she wailed. "We're family. You can't just throw us away like this. We'll lose everything. They're going to take our cars. They're going to kick us out of our place." I leaned forward. "Speaking of evictions," I said, pulling a piece of paper from my pocket. It was the eviction notice they had handed me yesterday. "I've decided to accept your terms. I'll be moving out of my apartment." "Good," Brandon muttered, rubbing his neck. "Good. At least you're being reasonable." "However," I continued, "the mansion on Highland Avenue is now trust property, and I am the trustee. I've decided to conduct a full audit of the estate." "What does that mean?" Tiffany whimpered. "It means," I said, "I'm changing the locks on the mansion today. You two have been living there rent-free for the 6 months. Catherine was in the hospital. That ends now." "You're kicking us out?" Brandon yelled. "Where are we supposed to go?" I took another look at the eviction notice in my hand. "I hear there's a nice little apartment opening up on Oak Street," I said. "Needs a bit of work. Smells a little musty, but it'll be available in 3 days." I tossed the notice back across the table to him. "Rent is $2,000 a month, payable to the trust. Don't be late." Brandon stared down at the paper, his hands trembling violently. I stood up. "Meeting adjourned," I said. I walked out of the conference room, with Prescott following close behind me. "That went remarkably well," Prescott said as we stepped into the elevator. "This is just the beginning," I replied. "Brandon won't back down," Prescott warned. "He's backed into a corner, and desperate people do fool things." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." The elevator doors opened into the main lobby, sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows. "Let's head to the bank, Arthur," I said. "I want to take a look at the main accounts, and after that, I'm going to buy a bottle of very expensive whiskey." "To celebrate?" Prescott asked. "No," I said. "To pour out a glass for Catherine. She always hated the cheap stuff I used to drink." Over the next 3 days, I watched my son's life unravel from a comfortable distance. I checked into a hotel, nothing flashy, just a clean place with room service. I needed a base of operations. My phone was ringing off the hook. Brandon tried calling 50 times, and Tiffany left 20 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I kept an eye on Tiffany's social media. That night, she went live on her channel, holding a glass of wine and sobbing uncontrollably into the camera. "My husband's father is a monster," she cried to her followers. "He stole our inheritance. He's abusing his power. We're being targeted by a bitter old man." The comment section blew up instantly. People showered her with sympathy and sent in monetary donations. "You poor thing. This is awful. Sue him." I watched the live stream, sipping my coffee. "Keep going," I whispered at the screen. "Dig that hole a little deeper." By the next morning, the first legal wave hit. I was served with a lawsuit. Brandon was suing to remove me as trustee, claiming I lacked the mental capacity to fulfill the role. He alleged I was suffering from dementia and was completely unfit to manage a $28 million estate. I called Prescott right away. He filed an emergency motion, Prescott explained. He attached an affidavit from a doctor who claims to have evaluated you and found signs of cognitive decline. I haven't seen a doctor in 2 years, I said. I know, Prescott said. The doctor's name is Aris. He's a well-known hired gun in these types of cases. Pay him $5,000 and he'll sign whatever you put in front of him. So what's our move? I asked. We fight it, Prescott said, but it will freeze the assets in the meantime. The judge will issue a temporary hold on the trust until a capacity hearing can be held. That could take months. Months. I repeated the word in my head. Brandon didn't have months. The loan sharks in Chicago weren't going to wait around for a court date. This was a stall tactic, an attempt to bully me into a settlement. Tell the judge I'm ready to undergo an independent psychological evaluation, I said. Right now. Today. It doesn't move that fast, Tom. The courts are slow. Then, find a way to speed them up, I said. I hung up the phone. I needed to push him over the edge. I needed him to make an even bigger mistake than filing a bogus lawsuit. I drove over to the mansion. I knew they hadn't moved out yet. I knew they were squatting there. I pulled up to the security gates in a taxi. The gate was locked, so I used my key. The digital code Catherine had given me 10 years ago. It still worked, and the gate swung open slowly. I walked up the long driveway. The mansion was an absolute monster of a house. 12 bedrooms, a pool, a tennis court, a towering monument to excess. Brandon's Porsche was parked out front. I walked up to the grand entrance and didn't bother knocking. I just used the key. I stepped into the foyer. The air smelled like stale pizza, mixed with expensive perfume. Cardboard boxes were scattered everywhere. They weren't packing to leave, they were selling things off. I noticed price tags stuck onto antique vases. $5,000, $10,000. They were running an estate sale, an illegal estate sale. I walked into the living room. Strangers were browsing around, picking up Catherine's crystal sculptures and inspecting them. In the corner, Brandon was accepting a stack of cash from a man in a trench coat. Done, Brandon was saying. Hand over the cash. What is going on here? I called out, my voice echoing through the space. The room went dead silent. Brandon spun around, looking like a deer caught in the headlights. Dad, he stammered. What are you doing here? You can't be here. I'm filing a restraining order against you. I looked at the man in the trench coat. He was holding a painting, a landscape Catherine had purchased in Paris. Put that down, I told him sternly. That is trust property. Buying stolen goods is a crime. The man looked at Brandon, his eyebrows raised. You said this was yours. It is mine, Brandon yelled. This is my mother's house. The man set the painting down and took a few steps back. I'm not getting caught up in this, he muttered, turning on his heel and walking out. The other buyers started filtering out quickly behind him, sensing danger. Get back here, Brandon screamed after them. Buy something, or get the hell out. He turned back to me, his eyes bloodshot and wide. He clearly hadn't slept in days, looking completely manic. You're ruining everything, he shrieked. I need this money. They're going to destroy me, Dad. Don't you get it? They're going to break my legs. Then maybe you shouldn't have gambled away money you didn't have, I said calmly. You're loving every second of this, aren't you? Tiffany spat, marching down the stairs. She was wearing one of Catherine's vintage mink coats. It was far too big for her, making her look ridiculous. "You've always been jealous," she sneered. "Jealous of Brandon. Jealous of Catherine's success. You're just a basic worker, an engineer. You couldn't stand being around people who actually made something of themselves." I looked at her coolly. "Take the coat off, Tiffany," I said. "Make me," she taunted. I didn't have to. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance. I had called the police on my way over. Brandon. Brandon ran to the window, his face pale. "Police? You called the cops on us? You're selling assets that don't belong to you," I said. "That's theft. Given the value of that painting, it qualifies as grand larceny." Brandon completely snapped. He looked wildly around the room, grabbed a vase. A genuine Ming Dynasty piece worth $20,000, and held it high above his head. "I'll smash it!" he screamed hysterically. "I'll break every single thing in this place. If I can't have it, nobody can." "Go ahead," I said softly. Brandon froze, expecting me to plead with him. "Break it," I repeated. "Everything in this house is insured. The trust will be reimbursed in full, and you'll just be adding felony destruction of property to your rap sheet. Go on. Son, show me what you've got." Brandon's hands began to shake. Slowly, he lowered the vase, collapsing onto the floor and sobbing as he clutched it like a teddy bear. "Why do you hate me so much?" he wept. "I don't hate you, Brandon," I said gently. "I'm trying to save you. Save me? You're destroying me." "No," I replied. "I'm stopping you. For 10 years you've been running on a treadmill of lies. You thought money was the solution to all your problems. It isn't, it's just fuel. And if your engine is broken, fuel just makes you burn down faster." A sharp knock rattled the front door. "Police! Open up!" I walked over and opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch. "Mr. Blackwood?" one of them asked. "I'm Thomas Blackwood, the trustee," I said. "These 2 are trespassing and attempting to sell trust property. I'd like them removed from the premises." Notice. The officers stepped inside, taking in the sight of Brandon weeping on the floor, and the price tags plastered across the furniture. "Sir, ma'am, you're going to need to come with us," the officer said. They didn't arrest them right then. It was still technically a civil dispute, but they escorted them off the property. I stood on the porch and watched as they were put into the back of a police cruiser and driven away. Tiffany was still screaming at the officers, boasting about her social media following, while Brandon just stared blankly out the window at me. He looked like a hollow shell of his former self. I locked the front door. I was all alone in the massive house. It was quiet. Too quiet. I walked through the empty hallways, memories of the house coming back to me. Back when it was full of life. Back when Brandon was just a little boy running down these very stairs. Where did I go wrong? I asked the empty air. I already knew the answer. I gave him too much. Catherine and I felt guilty for working so hard, so we compensated with gifts and cash. We let him grow up believing the world owed him a life of luxury. Now, I had to teach him the hardest lesson of all. I walked into the study and sat down at Catherine's desk. I opened the top drawer and pressed a hidden latch. I knew right where it was. I built the desk for her with my own hands 20 years ago. The false bottom popped open, revealing a small journal belonging to Catherine, along with a letter addressed to me. Thomas, T. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And if you're reading this, it means Brandon did exactly what we feared he would do. I tried to help him, Tom. I paid off his debts twice, I bailed him out. But he never learned. He just kept asking for more. You were always the strong one, the disciplined one. I need you to be strong one last time. Don't give him the money, not until he hits rock bottom. Not until he understands what it actually takes to earn $1. Break his fall, Tom, so we can finally help him rebuild. With all my love, Kate. I wiped a single tear from the corner of my eye. I wasn't being cruel. I was Catherine's final gift to our son. I was the rock bottom he desperately needed to hit. But the battle wasn't over yet. Brandon was backed into a corner, and a cornered rat doesn't just hide. It bites back. My phone rang. It was a blocked, unknown number, I answered. Mr. Blackwood, a rough, gravelly voice spoke. We represent certain interested parties out of Chicago. We understand you're currently holding the purse strings for your son. I gripped the phone tightly. That's right, I said. Good. Then you know he owes us $800,000. With interest, let's round it up to a clean $1 million. I don't owe you anything, I said firmly. No, the voice replied calmly. You don't. But accidents happen all the time. An old man falls down the stairs. A house catches fire. It would be a real shame if something happened to the trustee before he could sign off on a check. Are you threatening me? I asked. I'm explaining the reality of the situation, the voice said. You have 24 hours to wire the funds. Otherwise, we collect in person, and we don't take IOUs. The line went dead. I sat in the quiet study, the weight of the moment settling in. Brandon had brought wolves right to my doorstep. I looked down at Catherine's letter. Be strong one last time. I picked up the phone and dialed Prescott's number. We have a problem, I said. What is it? The Chicago debt is my problem now. They just threatened me. Call the police, Prescott urged immediately. No, I replied. The police won't stop guys like this. They'll just lay low and wait for the dust to settle. Then what do? We pay them, I said. What? You just said. I'm not giving them Catherine's money, I interrupted. I'm going to buy the debt myself. I don't follow. I'm using my personal savings, I explained. I've saved enough over the years. It's not millions, but it's substantial. I'm going to offer them a cash payout today to buy out the debt note at a discount. Why on earth would you do that? Prescott asked, utterly bewildered. Because, I said, once I own that debt, I own Brandon completely. He won't owe the mob anymore. He'll owe me, and I'm going to collect in a way those guys never could. How will you collect? I'm going to make him pay it back with sweat equity, I said. At minimum wage for the rest of his life, if that's what it takes. I hung up the phone. It was a risky gambit, one that would completely wipe out my personal retirement savings. If I failed, I'd be left with absolutely nothing. But it was the only way forward. I wasn't just fighting over money anymore. I was fighting for my son's soul. And that battle was only just beginning. I stayed in my hotel room with the blackout curtains pulled tight. Outside, the world was bright and noisy, but inside, it was dead silent. I needed quiet. I needed to think. My phone sat on the dark mahogany desk, buzzing every 3 seconds. They weren't incoming calls, but a relentless barrage of notifications, hundreds of them flooding in. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. My name was trending everywhere. Thomas Blackwood, the monster of Highland Avenue. I tapped a link sent from a number I didn't recognize, opening a recorded live stream. Tiffany appeared on screen. Gone were her usual designer clothes. Instead, she wore a plain, oversized gray t-shirt. She had no makeup on, and her eyes were red and swollen. Sitting on the floor of her parents' cramped living room, she clutched her knees, looking completely fragile and heartbroken. "She's a real professional, folks," she whimpered softly into the camera. "I didn't want to do this publicly. I wanted to handle this in private, but I'm just so scared. I'm so worried about my husband." The viewer count was climbing rapidly, 20,000, then 30,000. She wiped a single tear from her cheek. "You all know about the will," she continued. "You know Brandon's mother passed away. But you don't know the truth about his father. Thomas." She spat my name out like it was a dirty word. "He's always been cruel," she lied. "Not physically, but mentally." She tapped her temple. "He controlled Catherine for years. He made her feel like she was losing her mind. Now, he's doing the exact same thing to us. He threw us out on the street, standing there mocking us while we packed our things. He's withholding the inheritance just to watch us suffer. He's a narcissist and a predator." I watched the comment section scroll by so fast it blurred into a streak of pure hatred. "Expose him! Dox him! Somebody needs to teach that old man a lesson." I took a slow sip of my lukewarm coffee. I didn't feel angry. I felt a cold, detached sense of clarity. Back when I was a lead engineer, I built bridges across miles of open water, and I learned a vital lesson early on. You can't control the wind, and you can't control the waves. The only thing you can control is the structural integrity of the steel. You drive the foundation deep enough, and no storm can tear you down. Tiffany was the storm, a Category 5 hurricane of lies and manipulation trying to erode my foundation. What she didn't realize was that I was anchored to solid bedrock. She held up a piece of paper to the camera. "Look at this," she sobbed. "This is a letter of demands he sent us." I narrowed my eyes at the screen. It was fake. I had never written them a letter. I communicated exclusively through legal counsel. She had forged it. "He told us," she cried out, "that if we don't hand over half our future earnings for the rest of his life, he'll make sure we never see a dime of the inheritance. He's blackmailing his own son." A donation link below her video flashed brightly, and money began pouring in. $5, $10, $50 at a time from people donating to a so-called victims fund. I turned off the phone. I didn't throw it against the wall, and I didn't scream. I walked over to the window and peeked through a crack in the curtains. Down below, reporters were gathering, and I could spot the news vans idling near the curb. They had tracked me down. No doubt a hotel staff member had sold my location for a quick payday. I was trapped and isolated. I had no friends to call. My wife was gone. My son was my adversary, and the world viewed me as a villain. Most men might have crumbled right then. Most men would have rushed downstairs to defend themselves, shouting that it was all a lie. But an engineer knows that when the pressure gets too high, you don't add more pressure. You redistribute the load. I stepped into the bathroom, washed my face, and shaved. I put on a crisp shirt and tied my necktie with steady hands, then called down for room service, ordering a club sandwich and a pot of tea. When the attendant delivered the tray, he avoided making eye contact. He set it down heavily and practically sprinted out of the room. He had seen the video. I ate my sandwich, drank my tea, and opened my laptop to launch a video call with Prescott. His face popped up on the screen, dripping with sweat. He was sitting at his desk, but I could see staff rushing around frantically in the background. "Thomas," Prescott blurted out, "this is an absolute nightmare. The phones at the firm are ringing off the hook. We're getting threats. and people are calling for my disbarment. Calm down, Arthur, I said softly. Calm down. Have you seen what's happening online? They're digging up your past addresses. They're coming after you. We need to issue a statement. We need to settle. Give them a piece of the pie just to make this stop. No, I replied. Thomas, be reasonable. This is a public relations catastrophe. We are losing miserably in the court of public opinion. I don't care about public opinion, I said. I only care about the facts. They're destroying your reputation. My reputation was built over 40 years of honest work, I told him. It's not going to be undone by a girl putting on a fake performance for a ring light. Then, what do you want to do? Prescott sounded desperate. I need you to prepare a document, I said. What kind of document? The blueprint, Arthur. I want the document that pulls the rug out from under them. I leaned closer to the camera. Tiffany made a mistake. She got greedy. She forged a document which is fraud. She used false claims to solicit donations, which constitutes wire fraud, a serious federal offense. You want to press charges against her? Prescott asked. Not yet, I said. That moves too slowly. I'm deploying the nuclear option. Prescott froze. You mean Clause B? Precisely, Clause B. That was the failsafe Catherine put in place. A measure that was never meant to be triggered unless things went completely off the rails. It'll reduce everything to ash. Then it's time to light the fuse, I said. But the fallout? Just do it, Arthur. Draft the motion and send a copy directly to Brandon. And only Brandon. Don't send it to his lawyer, and don't send it to his wife. Send it straight to his personal inbox. Prescott hesitated. You're a cold man, Thomas. I'm a structural engineer, Arthur, I answered. I fix problems. And sometimes, to save a structure that's rotting from the inside out, you have to condemn it and bring it down completely. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the noise was growing louder, and I could hear chants echoing from below. Hey! Hey! Ho! Ho! Greedy fathers have got to go! It was catchy. I had to give them that. I picked up my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and jotted down a few variables. Variable 1, Brandon's gambling debt. Variable 2, Tiffany's vanity. Variable 3, the durability of their marriage once the cash ran dry. I ran the math. The equation didn't balance, and the structure was fundamentally unstable. All I had to do was pull a single pin. I checked my watch. 2 p.m. By 5 p.m., Brandon would receive that email. By 6 p.m., the cracks in his alliance with Tiffany would begin to show. And by tomorrow morning, the crowd outside my window would be the least of their worries. I poured myself another cup of tea and waited. Patience is a weapon. Those most people don't know how to wield it. They get restless. They overreact, and they explode. I simply waited. I waited for the concrete to set, for the steel to cool, and for my enemies to walk right into the trap I had built for them. All while they thought they were stepping into a palace. A notification popped up on my screen. A read receipt. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint, distant hum of the city below. I could practically hear the shouts of triumph coming from the other side of town. I pictured the scene perfectly. Brandon leaping up from the stained couch at his in-law's house, knocking over his drink, shouting that the old man had finally snapped under the pressure and surrendered. Tiffany probably grabbed her phone immediately to record a victory dance for her followers. They thought they had won. They thought the public shame, the lies, and the mounting pressure had broken me. They believed I was handing over the keys to the kingdom because I was too weak to fight back. The email was straightforward. A formal notice from the trustee, pursuant to the beneficiary's emergency request for housing, and in accordance with Clause B of the trust agreement, authorization is hereby granted for Brandon Blackwood and spouse to take immediate possession of the primary residence at 55 Highland Avenue. They didn't read the fine print. They never did. They only saw the address and the word authorized. They didn't ask why Catherine had nicknamed that house the Gilded Cage. Nor did they ponder why I, a structural engineer, had adamantly refused to set foot in it during the final 5 years of our marriage. All they saw was a $4.5 million mansion, imagining themselves living in total luxury. The move happened less than 24 hours later. I didn't have to guess. I watched the entire thing unfold live through the property's security feed. Sitting in my hotel room with a fresh cup of tea, I watched the monitors. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion as they waltzed right into the minefield. Brandon pulled up in a rented moving truck, with Tiffany following close behind in her convertible. She stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses and a white faux fur vest, gazing up at the house like a queen reclaiming her castle. From the outside, the property was breathtaking. A sprawling Victorian estate with stone turrets and ivy creeping up the walls, radiating old money elegance and power. They burst through the front door, and I switched the camera feed to the foyer. "We did it," Tiffany squealed, her voice echoing through the massive space as she spun around, recording herself. "Look at this, everyone. We're finally home. The haters tried to stop us, but love wins." Brandon popped a bottle of champagne. "To us," he yelled. "To the good life." I took a slow sip of my tea. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I muttered softly. The temperature drops tonight. The first crack in their perfect reality appeared 6 hours later. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a late autumn chill settled over the city. The estate had been built in 1902, featuring single-pane windows and stone walls that sucked the warmth right out of the air like a cold tomb. On the monitor, I saw Tiffany crossing her arms tightly, saying something to Brandon. He walked over to the thermostat on the wall and cranked it all the way up. Nothing happened. He tapped the display, fiddling with the dial frantically. I knew the system inside and out. The basement boiler was an original unit from a 1950s renovation. A volatile beast that required a precise sequence of valves to be opened, constant pressure checks, and a pilot light that blew out at the slightest draft. Catherine used to retain a full-time technician just to keep the monster running. I had let him go yesterday. By midnight, they were wandering around the house in heavy winter coats. I watched them huddled under a mountain of blankets on the antique sofa in the living room. There was a fireplace, right beside them, but they didn't dare light it. The chimney hadn't been swept in 3 years, and lighting a single log would have filled the entire ground floor with suffocating smoke in minutes. At 1 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Brandon. I let it go to voicemail. He called back again and again until I finally picked up. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice groggy as if I had been fast asleep. "Dad, the heat is out!" Brandon bellowed. "It's an icebox in here. You need to send someone to fix this right now." I sat up in bed and switched on the nightstand lamp. "I don't have to do anything, Brandon," I replied calmly. "Did you bother reading the full text of Clause B?" "What? I don't give a damn about the clause. I care that I can see my own breath in the living room. Get someone over here to fix it." Clause B explicitly states that upon occupancy The beneficiary assumes total financial responsibility for all property maintenance, utilities, and upkeep. I recited from memory. The trust provides the asset. You provide the operational funds. Are you out of your mind? He stammered. Not at all. You wanted the house. And now you have it. But it's a registered historical landmark, Brandon. That means any structural or mechanical repairs must be performed by certified specialists. You can't just hire a neighborhood handyman. Dad, please? It's 40 degrees in here. Then I suggest you put on a sweater, I said. Or pay for the repairs yourself. I believe the last estimate to overhaul the boiler system was $52,000. $52,000? Welcome to homeownership, son. I hung up and switched my phone completely off. The next morning, the harsh light of day exposed what the night had hidden. The mansion wasn't just cold, it was actively falling apart. When Catherine originally bought the place, she did it strictly for the land value, knowing the structure itself was a money pit. She had planned to tear it down and build luxury condos, but the Historical Society blocked the demolition, forcing her to leave it sitting largely vacant. She maintained only the bare minimum to keep the roof from caving in. I watched the security feed as Tiffany tried to take a shower in the master suite. She turned the brass handles, and the pipes shuddered violently, coughing up a dark, rusty brown sludge. The plumbing was ancient cast iron, heavily corroded from disuse. She shrieked, bursting out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel. Her hair matted with rust-tinted grime. She was crying, not her usual performative tears for the camera, but genuine tears of pure frustration and despair. This place is a dump. I heard her scream at Brandon. You told me this was a mansion? It is a mansion, Brandon shouted back. It just needs a little work. A little work? Brandon, there's mold covering the entire closet. My shoes are ruined. I ordered breakfast from room service and watched the drama unfold. It was better than anything on television. Then came the real trap, the financial vice. Around noon, a courier pulled up to the main gate and rang the intercom. Brandon went down to meet him, and the courier handed over a thick manila envelope. It wasn't from me. It was from the county tax assessor. Since the property was now officially occupied, I had arranged for all mail to be forwarded directly to the address. Brandon opened the envelope right there on the driveway. I zoomed in with the exterior camera, watching as his shoulders instantly slumped. In this district, property taxes on a $4.5 million estate were astronomical. Furthermore, because the residence was now occupied by a beneficiary rather than being held as a non-profit asset, the tax-exempt status Catherine had utilized was automatically rendered void. He was holding an immediate tax assessment for $85,000, due within 30 days. He trudged back inside, looking as if he'd been punched in the gut, and walked into the kitchen where Tiffany was attempting to boil water on the stove since the electric kettle was dead. We have a problem, Brandon said, tossing the bill onto the counter. Tiffany glanced at the total, her eyes nearly popping out of her head. Where are we supposed to get that kind of money, Brandon? We don't even have $5,000 right now. Then we sell something, Brandon yelled. A painting! Some of the silverware! They can't sell a thing, I whispered to the monitor. Right on cue, Prescott sent an email straight to Brandon's phone. My timing was precise. The email contained a comprehensive property inventory list. Every single item inside the house, from the oil paintings on the walls to the silver forks in the drawers, was cataloged as an asset of the trust. removing or selling any item, constituted grand theft and a severe breach of the trust terms, triggering immediate eviction and potential criminal charges. I watched Brandon pull out his phone and read the notice. He looked up at the antique sterling silver tea set, sitting on the counter, grabbed a heavy silver spoon and hurled it across the room. It struck the stone floor with a sharp clank. He was utterly trapped. Living in a museum he couldn't afford to visit, let alone maintain. Later that afternoon, the real predators began to circle. A black sedan pulled up to the front gate and two men in suits stepped out. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like enforcers sent to collect on the private debt Brandon owed back in Chicago. They pressed the gate buzzer, but Brandon didn't answer. They pressed it again, holding it down in a long, angry blast. I watched Brandon through the interior cameras as he cowered in the hallway, peeking out the window, completely terrified. He had promised his creditors that a massive windfall was coming once he secured the $28 million inheritance. Now, they knew he was hiding inside the estate, but they also realized he didn't have a dime. The two men stood at the gate for 10 minutes. One of them snapped a photo of the entrance while the other made a quick phone call. Then, they climbed back into the sedan and slowly drove away. Not giving up, but pulling back to plan their next move. Brandon collapsed onto the stairs, burying his face in his hands. Tiffany sat beside him, offering no comfort. She was busy scrolling through her phone, likely deleting comments, asking why she hadn't posted a mansion tour yet, or blocking followers who were pressing for updates. They were isolated, cold, hungry, and penniless, trapped inside a $4 million gilded cage that was slowly suffocating them. I closed my laptop. I had an appointment to keep with a very specific type of broker. Brandon was going to make a desperate move soon. I knew my son well. When backed into a corner, he didn't get smarter. He got reckless. He would try to leverage the house, attempting to take out an equity loan against the property, even if it meant forging my signature to do it. I needed to stay one step ahead. I had to ensure that when he reached out to grab a lifeline, he ended up pulling on an anchor that would drag him straight to the bottom. I put on my coat. The hotel room was warm and tranquil, and for a split second, I felt a faint flicker of pity for them shivering in that drafty tomb. Then, I remembered the eviction notice served at the cemetery. I remembered the live stream tearing down my character. I remembered the email labeling me a narcissist. The pity vanished in an instant. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a retired engineer anymore. I looked like a man who was finished building bridges. I opened the door and stepped out. Phase 2 was complete. The house was crushing them. Now, it was time for Phase 3, total financial collapse. I took the elevator down to the lobby, and my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text message from Brandon. "Dad, we need to talk. It's an emergency." I didn't reply. Let him sweat. I thought. Let the cold seep deep into his bones. Let him realize that the warmth he took for granted his entire life was never free. Someone was paying for it. And that person just resigned. I sat in my hotel room monitoring the video feeds. It was a pathetic sight. Brandon, wrapped in 3 layers of cashmere sweaters, was pacing back and forth in the freezing study. He looked like a displaced prince trying to rule over a pile of rubble. The house was freezing, the water ran brown, and the silence was deafening. He picked up his phone. I knew exactly who he was calling. Thanks to the master permissions on our family plan, I had direct access to his call logs, a detail he had never bothered to disconnect from my account. He dialed a number saved simply as the guy. There it was. The fatal mistake I had been waiting for. I patched into the audio feed. "I need cash," Brandon muttered frantically into the receiver. "No, not to clear the main debt. I just need a short-term cushion to breathe. I need 50 grand to keep the lights on and fix the heat." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "I have collateral," Brandon lied through his teeth. "I have the estate. It's worth over $4 million. I can sign a quick lien agreement." He was pledging property he didn't own, committing fraud once again. I disconnected the audio monitor, picked up my phone, and dialed the number for the lending group in Chicago. The very men who had threatened me earlier, the ones holding the $800,000 debt note on my son. "Mr. Blackwood," the gravelly voice answered. "I'm ready to make a deal," I said firmly. An hour later, I met them in a quiet back booth at a downtown steakhouse. It was a cliché meeting spot, but criminals always love their traditions. There were two of them, wearing ill-fitting, expensive suits. They looked at me as if I were a desperate father, trying to save his son from a terrible mistake. They were dead. Wrong. I was a businessman buying up distressed assets. I slid a cashier's check across the table. $600,000. "The debt is $800," the main enforcer said flatly. "Plus interest, make it a solid $1 million." "It's a bad debt," I replied calmly. "You know it, and I know it. Brandon doesn't have the money, and I have the trust locked down tight. If you eliminate him, you collect zero. If you try to sue him, you'll be standing in line behind 50 other creditors." I pushed the check closer. $600,000, clear and liquid, right now. Take the cash, assign the debt note to my holding company, or walk away with nothing. The man stared down at the check, then exchanged a glance with his partner. Greed and pride waged a brief war behind his eyes, but greed won. It always does. He took the check and signed the transfer documentation I had prepared. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Blackwood," he sneered. "Your kid is a complete loser. You're throwing your money away." "I'm not throwing it away," I said coolly. "I'm paying for his education." I left the steakhouse with the signed transfer in my pocket. I now owned Brandon's worst nightmare. The crew from Chicago wouldn't be coming to break his legs anymore. But I held absolute legal control over his future. Back at the hotel, I opened my laptop. Brandon had turned to a local predatory lender operating out of a pawn shop on 4th Street to get his $50,000 fix. Through remote access, I watched as an email confirmation popped up on Brandon's screen. He had agreed to an absurd 40% interest rate, signing a document pledging the contents of the mansion as collateral. He was liquidating Catherine's legacy bit by bit just to buy heating oil and takeout. I called the pawn shop owner directly, using the name of my shell entity, Ironwood Financial. "I understand you just issued a high-risk cash advance to a Brandon Blackwood," I said. "Who's asking?" the owner replied guardedly. "I am the primary lien holder on all his assets," I lied seamlessly. "Your loan is completely subordinate to mine. If he defaults, which he will, I will seize everything before you see a single nickel. However, I'm willing to buy out your debt position right now. Full principal, plus a 5% convenience fee." The shop owner didn't hesitate. He knew a bad risk when he saw one, and closed the deal on the spot. By 5 p.m. that afternoon, I was the sole creditor for every single debt my son owed. The gambling markers, the fresh emergency loan, even Tiffany's maxed-out credit card balances. I had bought them all up through Ironwood Financial. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of absolute control and deep sorrow. I owned my son completely, though he didn't know it yet. He still thought he had pulled off a clever little maneuver. I switched the video feed back to the mansion. The atmosphere had shifted. The heat was back on. Radiators clanking and hissing as warmth pumped into the cold rooms. Brandon was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by bags of luxury takeout. Sushi, lobster rolls, and champagne. He had taken $50,000 meant for property repairs and used the rest to throw a party for two. Tiffany was laughing, recording a video for her page. "We're survivors," she shouted into her phone. "We hit a bump in the road, but we're back on top. The haters can't keep us down." They were clinking glasses, celebrating with money they didn't have, funded by debt they could never hope to repay. I picked up my phone and sent Brandon a text message from an anonymous number linked to Ironwood Financial. "Mr. Blackwood," the message read, "notice is hereby given that all outstanding liabilities have been consolidated and acquired by Ironwood Financial LLC. Your initial payment of $15 is due in 48 hours. Failure to remit funds will result in immediate asset seizure." I watched the monitor closely. Brandon's phone buzzed. He picked it up and read the screen. The lobster roll dropped right out of his hand. He handed the phone to Tiffany, and her laughter instantly vanished. She glanced at the camera, realized she was still broadcasting live, and abruptly killed the stream. "Who is Ironwood Financial?" Tiffany shrieked. "I don't know," Brandon stammered wildly. "I don't know, but they bought out the Chicago debt and the pawn shop loan. They own all of it. $15,000 in 2 days?" Tiffany screamed. "We just spent $3,000 on dinner and wine." I watched them descend into total panic. They began frantically running through the rooms, searching for anything they could sell off quickly. Grabbing silver candlesticks, snatching small oil paintings off the walls. But they couldn't leave the house. The police had already warned them about moving assets off the property, and if they got caught, they'd be arrested on the spot. They were trapped in a warm house, with bellies full of expensive food. Yet their terror was 100 times worse than when they were freezing, because their enemy was no longer the cold or the dark. It was a faceless, relentless corporate entity demanding immediate payment. I closed my laptop, needing to get some sleep before a busy morning. I had foreclosure documents to prepare, not to take the house, since the trust already owned it, but to foreclose on them. When Brandon eventually found a job, I would garnish his wages. I would freeze his bank accounts. I would ensure that every dollar he made for the rest of his life went directly toward paying off the debts he had created. He wanted to play the high roller and live a grand life on borrowed time. Well, the bill had arrived, and his father was the collector. I lay in the hotel bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. "Catherine," I whispered into the quiet room, "I hope you can forgive me for what I'm about to do." Deep down, I knew she would understand. She built skyscrapers, and she knew that before you can construct something new, you sometimes have to demolish the old structure, down to the deepest bedrock. Brandon was about to learn that hitting rock bottom wasn't just a metaphor, it was a physical destination. And he had just arrived. The glow of my laptop screen was the only source of light in the hotel suite. I sat in the dark, sipping a glass of water, watching the final act of my son's moral downfall play out on the monitors. The audio feed from the mansion was crystal clear. I could hear the cold wind rattling the ancient window panes, accompanied by the nervous clicking of Tiffany's acrylic nails tapping against the granite counter. They were completely out of options. The notice from Ironwood Financial demanding the first payment had pushed them over the edge. They were no longer trying to find money. They were looking for a way to reset the board entirely. They needed the trustee gone. I watched Brandon pacing frantically across the study floor, looking haggard and unkempt, with 3 days of dark stubble on his face. "We don't have a choice," Tiffany whispered, wrapped tightly in a blanket, her face pale. "He's going to ruin us, Brandon. He bought the debt. He controls the house. And he's going to put us on the street. We have to execute the medical plan." I leaned closer to the monitor. This was it. The exact moment they crossed the line from greedy kids to full-fledged criminals. Brandon stopped pacing and turned to his wife. "Dr. Aris wants $50,000 in cash," Brandon said. "We maxed out the very last credit line we had to pay him. If this fails, we're finished." "It's not going to fail," Tiffany insisted. "He forged the medical file yesterday. Acute delusional paranoia coupled with aggressive dementia. He backdated the records 6 months to create a paper trail showing your father's mental state has been deteriorating. Once the authorities see that file, they won't even ask questions. They'll just take him into custody. And once he's committed," Brandon added, a flicker of dark confidence returning to his voice, "Aris will keep him heavily sedated. We file for emergency guardianship, reclaim control of the trust, and pay off Ironwood Financial." It was a cold, calculated plan, vicious, illegal, but thoroughly planned out. Had I been an ordinary, defenseless old man, it might have worked seamlessly. I would have woken up in a facility, sedated and unable to defend myself. But I wasn't just an old man. I was the man listening to every single word. I picked up my phone and sent a quick text to a contact saved as medic. "Moving tonight," I typed. "Be ready." Then I sat back and waited. 2 hours later, a heavy pounding rattled my hotel room door. Not a polite knock, but an aggressive, demanding thud. I stood up, adjusted my jacket, and checked my reflection in the mirror to make sure I looked completely composed. Then opened the door. The hallway was crowded. Brandon stood at the front, putting on the performance of his life, wringing his hands with tears in his eyes. "Dad, please," he choked out dramatically. "Just open the door. We're only trying to help you." Standing right behind him was Dr. Aris, whom I recognized instantly from the photos Prescott had provided. He was a short, sweaty man in a cheap suit, clutching a clipboard like a shield. 2 uniformed paramedics and 2 police officers stood in the hallway behind them. "Thomas Blackwood?" one of the officers asked, stepping forward. "We received an emergency call regarding a welfare check. This medical professional has presented an emergency containment order." Dr. Aris stepped up, holding out his clipboard. "Officer, the patient is severely delusional and poses an immediate danger to himself and others. His condition has been declining for months. We need to transport him to a secure facility for observation immediately." I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice or act erratic. I simply looked at the officer with steady, calm eyes. "Officer," I said softly, "do I appear delusional or violent to you right now?" The officer hesitated, looking me up and down. I was wearing a tailored suit, standing tall, and speaking with absolute clarity. "Dad, stop pretending," Brandon burst out, trying to force panic into his voice. "You've been talking to people who aren't there. You've been threatening us. Show them the letter, Tiffany." Tiffany stepped forward, holding up the forged letter of demands. "He's been blackmailing us." He thinks he's running some grand conspiracy. I let out a slow, quiet sigh. Officer, may I show you something on my tablet before you make any decisions? Dr. Aris cut in quickly, his voice rising in panic. Officer, as a licensed physician, I strongly advise against listening to him. Paranoia manifests in very deceptive ways. He needs to be sedated immediately. Quiet down, Doc, the officer said sternly, raising a hand. He turned to me. What do you want to show me, sir? I picked up my tablet from the desk and turned the screen toward the officers. Displayed on the screen was a crisp, high-definition video feed of the mansion's study from just 3 hours ago. The audio played clearly through the tablet's speakers. Doctor, Aris wants $50,000 in cash. Brandon's voice echoed down the hotel hallway. He backdated the records 6 months to create a paper trail. Once the authorities see that file, they won't even ask questions. The hallway went dead silent. Brandon's face drained of every drop of color. Tiffany let out a tiny choked gasp and took a step back. Dr. Aris dropped his clipboard, the papers scattering across the carpet. The police officer stared at the tablet, then slowly turned his head to look at Brandon, Tiffany, and the doctor. His expression shifted from routine concern to dark, heavy authority. Is that a live recording of your house, sir? Asked me. It's a security feed from the property owned by the Catherine Blackwood Trust, I explained calmly. I am the sole trustee. These individuals entered the property illegally, conspired to commit fraud, bribed a medical professional to falsify federal medical documents, and attempted an illegal civil commitment. I turned to look at Dr. Aris. And as for you, doctor, filing a false medical containment order is a felony, not to mention the conspiracy charges. Dr. Aris didn't say a word. He turned on his heel and tried to walk briskly down the hallway. Hold it right there! The second officer barked, grabbing Aris by the arm and spinning him around against the wall. Officer! Wait! Brandon panicked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. This is a misunderstanding. He's setting us up. He bought my debts. He's controlling everything. You recorded yourselves conspiring to commit a crime. Son, the first officer said coldly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. No! No! Tiffany, do something! Brandon screamed as the steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. Tiffany was already backing away, her hands raised in terror. I didn't do anything. It was all his idea. He paid the doctor. I was just following him. Brandon whipped his head toward her, his eyes wide with betrayal. What? Tiffany, you told me to do it. You're a liar. She shrieked back as the second officer stepped over and cuffed her as well. He made me do it. I'm the victim here. I stood in the doorway of my hotel room, watching my son and his wife tear each other apart in real time. The alliance built on greed, vanity, and lies collapsed the very second the consequences arrived. As the officers began leading them down the hallway, Brandon turned back to look at me over his shoulder. The arrogant smirk from the funeral was completely gone, replaced by pure, helpless desperation. Dad, he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please, don't let them take me. I'm your son. Please, help me. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. I am helping you, Brandon, I said softly. This is the help you've needed for 10 years. I stepped back into my room and quietly closed the door, shutting out the sound of their arguments as they were escorted away. The next morning, the sun rose over a quiet city. I sat in Mr. Prescott's office, sipping a hot cup of black coffee. The headlines had shifted dramatically overnight. The fake news stories were gone, replaced by breaking updates. Local executive and influencer wife arrested in fraud and conspiracy scheme. The doctor is already talking, Prescott said, looking over a stack of legal papers. He admitted to taking the $50,000 bribe. Brandon and Tiffany are facing felony conspiracy, filing false police reports, and attempted illegal commitment. They won't be getting out on bail anytime soon, especially with Ironwood Financial placing a hold on all their personal accounts. Good, I said. So, what happens now? Prescott asked, leaning back in his chair. The trust is secure, the debts are consolidated under your holding company, and the bad actors are behind bars. You've won, Thomas. No, I said, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the skyline. I haven't won yet. What do you mean? Winning isn't putting my son in a cage, I said softly. Winning is making sure that when he comes out, he's a man worth knowing. I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. Keep the pressure on the legal proceedings, I instructed Prescott. Let's ensure they serve their time for the crimes they actually committed. But when Brandon's sentence is finished, tell him Ironwood Financial has a job waiting for him. A job? Prescott raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Maintenance, I replied with a faint smile. Starting at the bottom at minimum wage, working off every single dollar he owes to the trust. He's going to learn how to fix the boiler on Highland Avenue with his own two hands. I walked out of the law office and stepped into the crisp morning air. I pulled my old, cracked phone from my pocket, dialed a familiar number, and placed it to my ear. Catherine, I whispered toward the quiet sky. The bridge is down. Now we rebuild. Behind them stood two uniformed police officers and two paramedics pushing a gurney. Mr. Blackwood, one of the officers said, stepping forward. We received a report stating you pose an immediate danger to yourself and others. We have a court-ordered emergency mental health evaluation order. I looked at the officer. He was young, just doing his job, based on a mountain of lies he had been fed. Officer, I said calmly, I'm sitting here in my hotel room, drinking a cup of tea. Does this look like a dangerous situation to you? He has weapons hidden in here. Tiffany shrieked, shoving her way through the crowd from the back. He told us he had a gun. He said he was going to take us out, and then himself. He's hearing things. The sheer audacity of the lie was almost breathtaking. Dr. Aris stepped forward, waving his clipboard. Officer, I'm Dr. Aris, the family's primary physician. Mr. Blackwood has a documented history of paranoid schizophrenia and early-onset dementia. He's been off his medication for weeks. He is in an acute psychotic state right now. If we don't sedate him immediately, he could snap and hurt someone. I looked right at Aris. I've never met you before in my life, I said. See? Aris shook his head, looking pitifully at the office. He doesn't even recognize me. He's completely wiped the last 5 years from his memory. It's dementia. It's deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Brandon stepped into the room, reaching out as if to hug me. I took a step back. Dad, please, Brandon sobbed. Just go with the doctors. They're going to take care of you. I can't bear to watch you suffer like this. You're seeing things that aren't even there. I looked at my son, staring deep into his eyes, looking for a single flicker of hesitation or guilt. There was nothing. Just cold, calculating ambition. He was actually willing to lock me away in a chemical prison for the rest of my life, just so he could buy a yacht. In that exact moment, I realized the son I used to love was gone. He had died long ago, replaced by this hollow shell standing before me. I looked at the police officers. "I'll go with you," I said. "I won't make a scene." "He's resisting," Tiffany yelled. "He has a knife in his pocket. Grab him." The officers instantly tensed up, one of them placing a hand over his holster. "Ma'am, step back," the officer commanded. I slowly raised my hands. "I don't have any weapons," I said. "You're welcome to search me." The officer patted me down, finding only my wallet, my phone, and a small notebook. No gun, no knife. "He's hallucinating," Dr. Aris chimed in smoothly, covering his tracks. "He probably believed he was holding a knife. For his own safety, we need to restrain him." The officer looked doubtful, but he had a signed medical order right in front of him. He gave a slight nod to the paramedics. "Restrain him," the officer said. The two paramedics stepped into the room. One of them was broad-shouldered and wearing a mask that covered most of his face. He took my arm, his grip firm but not painful. I glanced down at his name tag. Davis. He was my guy. Davis guided me down onto the gurney, clicking the leather straps around my wrists with practiced efficiency. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood," Davis said, his voice muffled behind the mask. "This is for your own good." He secured the straps around my ankles next. Brandon let out a long, heavy sigh of relief that sounded like air deflating from a tire, wiping away his fake tears. "Thank you, officer," Brandon said smoothly. "Thank you. You saved his life." I lay on the gurney, staring up at the ceiling. "You're making a massive mistake, Brandon," I said softly. He leaned in close over me, his face just inches from mine, smelling of anxiety and peppermint mints. "Don't worry, Dad," he whispered, so low only I could hear. "By tomorrow morning, you won't remember a single thing. Dr. Aris has a very strong prescription waiting for you. Goodbye, Dad." He straightened up and nodded to the paramedics. "Take him away." They wheeled me out into the hallway and down the service elevator. The lobby was packed with onlookers, watching the fallen millionaire being hauled off to an asylum. With Dr. Aris, they loaded me into the front passenger seat, while Davis, climbing into the Nascentman's second paramedic, stayed in the back. With me. The heavy back doors slammed on shut, the sirens blared, and the vehicle lurched forward. We drove for just 2 blocks before the sirens suddenly cut out. Davis stood up, pulling down the window blinds to block the view from the outside. He pulled off his mask and grinned. "That was a close call, boss," Davis said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, quickly unlocking the leather straps from my wrists and ankles. I sat up, rubbing my wrists. "Did you get it all?" I asked. Davis pointed to a button-sized micro-camera pinned to his uniform shirt. "High-def audio and video," Davis said. "Got Aris claiming he's been treating you for 5 years, got Tiffany lying about the gun, and got your son whispering that he was going to wipe your memory. It's all uploaded to the cloud in real time, Mr. Blackwood." I looked toward the front cabin. Dr. Aris was sitting up there with the driver. "Does the driver know what's going on?" I asked. "Driver's my cousin," Davis smiled. "As for Aris, he thinks we're taking you to his private clinic in the county. He's up there, counting his 50 grand in his head." "So where are we actually heading?" I asked. "To the safe house," Davis replied. "Prescott is waiting for you there. He's already got a notary and a judge on standby. We're wrapping this evidence up tight tonight." I glanced out the small window in the back door as the city lights faded behind us. "What about Aris?" I asked. Davis grinned, reaching down for a medical kit and pulling out a syringe. "The driver's going to pull over In 5 minutes, citing mechanical trouble, Davis said. We'll offer the good doctor a bottle of water. He looks thirsty. By the time he wakes up, he'll be sitting in a police precinct with a pre-typed confession waiting for his signature. I nodded. It was ruthless, but it was necessary. We pulled into a quiet side alley. The back doors swung open, and I stepped out of the ambulance, a completely free man. Eris was fast asleep in the passenger seat, slumped against the window. I walked over, reached through the window, and took the clipboard from his lap. I glanced at the falsified medical files. A masterclass in fraud. I left the clipboard right where it was. It was key evidence. Deliver him to the precinct, I told Davis. I watched the ambulance drive off Tongalondi the alley, standing alone in the alley, as I took a deep breath of night air. My son thought I was strapped to a gurney right now, drooling on my way to a chemical lobotomy. He thought the board was cleared. He thought he had won. He was about to celebrate. He'd start spending money he didn't have and selling off assets he didn't own. He was going to get sloppy and expose himself completely. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Prescott. Phase 3 complete, I said. I've gone underground. Fantastic, Prescott said. Brandon just updated his status on social media. Heartbroken, but relieved. Dad is finally getting the help he needs. He's celebrating, I said. Indeed, Prescott confirmed. He just scheduled an emergency auction. Tomorrow night at the mansion, liquidating the entire antique collection from the estate. An auction, I repeated. Illegal, unauthorized, and completely public. The ultimate evidence, I said. I looked out at the city skyline. Let him sell, I said. Let him gather all the buyers. Let him stand on that stage, believing he's the king of the world. I'll be there, Prescott. Understood, Thomas. Get me a mask. I'm going shopping for some antiques. I hung up the phone. I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to let him build his own public execution stage, and I was going to be the one to pull the lever. The game wasn't over. The trap had just sprung, and my son was right inside the cage. The black sedan I rented for the evening rolled up the long driveway, tires crunching softly against the gravel. Looking out from the back seat, I watched a line of luxury cars winding toward the mansion like a snake. Bentleys, Ferraris, and a few vintage Rolls-Royces. My son had successfully summoned a flock of vultures, the kind of people who smell blood in the water and swim over with open wallets, desperate to pick a dying estate clean before the legal authorities step in. I adjusted the silk masquerade mask covering my face. It was a themed auction, a pretentious touch added by Tiffany to make the illegal liquidation of my ex-wife's assets look like a high society gala. It played right into my hands. To them, I was just another anonymous bidder, a faceless wallet in a tuxedo. To myself, I was the executioner arriving for the final act. I stepped out of the car into the crisp night air. The mansion was ablaze with light, glowing like a Christmas tree. Every window shone, and music floated across the manicured lawn. It looked alive and festive, but I knew the foundation was rotting underneath. I walked up the grand steps, presenting an electronic invitation Prescott had forged for me on my phone. The private security guard, who had no idea what I actually looked like, waved me right through. Inside, the home I had once shared with Catherine had been transformed into a flea market. Furniture was shoved against the walls. Display cases were set up in the center of the ballroom, and servers wove through the crowd carrying trays of champagne, walking right through the ghosts of my memories. I spotted Brandon immediately. He was standing on a raised platform at the far end of the room, holding a microphone. He looked manic, his eyes way too bright, his movements sharp and twitchy. He was wearing a tuxedo I recognized instantly, a custom suit I'd left in the closet 5 years ago. It strained tight across his chest, the buttons ready to burst. He was quite literally trying to step into his father's shoes and failing miserably. Tiffany moved smoothly through the crowd, her laugh loud and artificial. She was dripping in Catherine's jewelry, a diamond choker and sapphire earrings, assets explicitly designated in the trust as non-liquid and meant to be preserved. She was flaunting her crimes for everyone to see. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and backed into the shadows at the edge of the room. I needed to wait. I needed him to complete the transaction. Intent alone wasn't enough. I needed a closed deal. Ladies and gentlemen, Brandon's voice echoed over the speakers. Welcome to the estate sale of the century. Tonight, we offer items never before made available to the public. Priceless treasures gathered over a lifetime of building an empire. And remember, tonight is cash only. No paper trail, just pure acquisition. Excited laughter rippled through the crowd. They knew this was illegal, and that was part of the thrill. They were buying stolen goods, and they didn't care one bit. The auction began, quickly devolving into a feeding frenzy. A pair of Ming Dynasty vases went for $40,000. A 19th century hand-woven Persian rug went for $60,000. Brandon was practically shaking with excitement, doing the math in his head, calculating how much debt he could clear and how much cash he could pocket. He thought he was home free. He believed his father was currently strapped to a padded bed, drooling while he sold off the family legacy in broad daylight. I waited until the centerpiece of the evening was brought out. 2 men carried a large canvas draped in velvet onto the stage. Brandon whipped the velvet cover away with a flourish, and the crowd let out a collective gasp. It was The Solitude. The Solitude, a painting Catherine had purchased in Vienna 30 years ago. It wasn't just art, it was history. More importantly, it was the single item explicitly designated in Catherine's will to be donated to the National Gallery. It was classified as a protected cultural asset. Selling it privately was far beyond simple theft. It was a federal offense, involving the trafficking of protected property. Starting bid, $500,000. Brandon announced, his voice trembling with greed. 500. A voice from the front row called out. 600. Another chimed in. I stepped out from the shadows and raised my hand. 1 million, I said clearly. The entire room went silent, every head turning toward me. The figure hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Brandon squinted through the stage lights, trying to see who had spoken. 1 million, Brandon repeated, his voice cracking slightly. Do I hear 1.1? Silence. 1 million for a stolen painting was steep, even for this crowd. Going once at 1 million, Brandon said, sweat glistening on his forehead. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the black mask for $1 million. The gavel came down with a sharp clack that echoed like a gunshot through the room. The crime was finalized. He had accepted the bid. The deal was struck. I walked toward the stage, the crowd parting to make way for me. I moved with steady, heavy steps, the stride of a man in complete control of his destination. Come on up to settle the account, sir. Brandon grinned, holding out a hand. He was trembling, visualizing his freedom. I stepped onto the platform, standing toe-to-toe with my son. I'll settle the account, Brandon, I said. He froze, the grin locking on his lips as his eyes went wide. He recognized the voice. The same voice that had read him bedtime stories. The voice that had taught him how to ride a bike. The voice of the man he had tried to erase with a fake medical diagnosis. "Dad," he whispered, completely stunned. I raised my hand, untied the silk ribbon of the mask, and let it drop to the floor. A sharp gasp rippled through the ballroom. A few guests recognized me, and whispers immediately erupted across the floor. "Isn't he supposed to be in a facility? I thought he lost his mind. I'm not insane." "Brandon," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone he was still clutching tightly. "But I am deeply, deeply disappointed." You were taken away," Brandon stammered, backing up until he hit the easel, holding the painting. Dr. Eris said. "Dr. Eris is currently in federal custody," I said calmly, "and in about 30 seconds, you're going to be joining him." Brandon looked around frantically, searching for an exit or an ally. His eyes landed on Tiffany, who stood frozen near the champagne fountain, her face as pale as the pearls around her neck. "You can't do this," Brandon hissed through gritted teeth. "This is my house. These are my things." I pulled a document from my inner coat pocket. "This is the master inventory for the Catherine Blackwood Protective Trust," I announced, holding it up for the room to see. "Every item sold here tonight is clearly catalogued. And this painting was explicitly set aside as a national asset. Selling it privately is a direct violation of the National Stolen Property Act." I turned my attention to the crowd. "To anyone who purchased an item tonight, I strongly suggest you leave it right where it is. Knowingly taking possession of stolen property is a felony. If you walk out those doors with so much as a silver spoon, you will be prosecuted." Panic erupted instantly. The vultures wanted easy prey, not a legal nightmare. They dropped vases, abandoned antique rugs, and scrambled toward the exits, shoving past one another to escape the scene. Brandon grabbed my arm tightly. "Dad, stop!" he screamed. "You're ruining me. I need this money. They're going to destroy me." I looked down at his grip on my sleeve. "Let go," I said softly. He didn't let go. He held on tighter, his eyes wild with desperation. He reached into his pocket with his other hand, and I didn't know if he had a weapon or not. And I didn't care. Suddenly, the stained glass windows at the front of the hall shattered inward. Flashbangs went off in the foyer with a blinding flash and a deafening roar, filling the air with smoke. "FBI, everyone down on the ground." Prescott hadn't just called local law enforcement. He had brought in a federal task force specializing in art theft and major fraud. The investigation into Dr. Eris and the forged documents had led them straight to this room. Fully armed tactical agents flooded the space. Brandon let out a terrified screech and turned to bolt, but he didn't make it 3 steps before an agent tackled him hard to the floor. I watched my son hit the parquet flooring. I watched them pull his hands behind his back and secure them with thick zip ties. I watched him kick and wail like a child throwing a tantrum, his face pressed against the very floorboards I had laid with my own hands 20 years ago. Tiffany tried to blend into the fleeing crowd, slipping toward a side exit, but an agent was already waiting for her. "Mrs. Blackwood," the agent said coldly, "we have a warrant for your arrest regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and identity theft." They slapped handcuffs into us on her wrists, the diamonds she was wearing sparkling mockingly under the bright tactical flashlights. I stood alone on the stage, right beside the priceless painting. The room cleared out quickly, leaving only the agents, the handcuffed suspects, and me. An agent stepped up to the platform. "Mr. Blackwood?" he asked. "I'm Thomas Blackwood," I replied. "I'm the trustee. We've secured the perimeter, and the suspects are in custody. We'll need a formal statement from you shortly." I looked down at Brandon as they hauled him up from the floor. He was sobbing uncontrollably, mascara and sweat running down his face, staring up at me. "Dad, help me. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them I didn't know." I walked down the steps, stopped right in front of him, and leaned in close. "I can't help you, Brandon," I whispered softly. "The trustee has denied your request." "You're a monster!" he shrieked helplessly as they dragged him toward the door. "You planned all of this. You set me up." "I didn't set you up, son," I said to his retreating back. "I just let you be yourself." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, and silence returned to the mansion once more. I looked around at the chaos: overturned chairs, spilled champagne, the wreckage of a life built on pure greed. Prescott walked in through the side door, flanked by 2 agents. "It's over," Prescott said. "Is it really over?" I asked. He nodded. "They're facing at least 20 years. The federal charges for art theft are airtight, on top of the grand fraud and attempted kidnapping through illegal commitment. They won't be seeing daylight anytime soon." A wave of crushing exhaustion washed over me. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like a heavy, gray weight. "I need a drink, Arthur," I said. I walked over to the corner bar, found the bottle of whiskey Brandon had been drinking, and poured 2 glasses of the 18-year single malt, handing one to Prescott. "To Catherine," I said. Prescott clinked his glass against mine. "To Catherine." I drank it down, the burn in my throat feeling real and grounding. But as the warmth spread through my chest, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Tiffany. She must have scrambled to send it right before the agents seized her phone. I stared at the screen. "You think you won," she wrote. "But you don't know the half of it. Check the safe in the master bedroom. Brandon didn't just sell the art. He sold the only thing you actually cared about." I stared at the words. The safe. That was where Catherine kept her private journals, and the letters we wrote to each other when we were young. Things with 0 monetary value, but worth more to me than the entire estate combined. I sprinted up the stairs, no longer feeling like an old man, driven by a surge of cold panic. I burst into the master bedroom. The safe door was swung wide open, completely empty inside. They had sold my memories. I collapsed onto the bed. I had won the war and destroyed my enemies, but as I stared into that empty steel box, I realized that in a war between a father and his son, there are no winners, there are only survivors. I had survived, but the cost just kept climbing. The quiet that followed the mansion raid didn't last long, though I knew it wouldn't. Federal charges carry immense weight, but the legal system is a slow-moving machine, and bail bondsmen are always hungry for business. 3 days after watching my son and his wife dragged off in handcuffs, they were back on the street. They had surrendered their passports and wore heavy ankle monitors, but, for the moment, they were out. I sat in my hotel room, staring at my phone. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for the inevitable collapse. Pressure does strange things to structures built without proper integrity. It finds the microfractures and widens them mercilessly. The marriage between Brandon and Tiffany was nothing more than a hairline crack held together by greed and hairspray. On Tuesday night, my phone rang. It wasn't Brandon. It was Tiffany. I picked up on the first ring, staying silent without saying hello. "Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling violently. The dramatic flair she put on for her followers was completely gone, replaced by pure, unfiltered terror. Tom, I need to see you alone. Please, don't tell Brandon. I glanced at the recording device I had already set up next to my phone. Why would I meet with you, Tiffany? I asked. You just tried to sell off my family's legacy to the highest bidder. Because I can give you Brandon, she said. The words hung in the air, cold, sharp, and precise. I named a location, a small diner on the edge of town. Far away from the country clubs and her usual social circles. A place where truckers ate meatloaf. At the counter, and nobody cared who you were or what designer brand you were wearing. I arrived 10 minutes early, took a booth in the back, and ordered a black coffee. Tiffany walked in wearing a hoodie and jeans. She looked small and ordinary, the expensive diamonds gone, seized as evidence. The arrogance had completely evaporated, leaving behind a woman terrified of the long prison sentence looming over her. She slid into the booth across from me, ordering nothing, just clutching a glass of water with both hands like a lifeline. He's lost it, Tom, she blurted out, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Brandon has completely lost his mind. He's blaming everything on me. He told his lawyer. I orchestrated the auction. He's trying to set me up. I took a sip of my coffee, staying completely silent and letting the quiet stretch out. In my years negotiating contracts with steel unions, I learned a key lesson. If you stay quiet long enough, the other person will fill the void with the truth. I didn't know about the forged documents, she rambled, the words spilling out. I didn't know he forged your signature on those loan papers. I thought he had your permission. I thought he was handling the trust legally. I was just a wife supporting her husband. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. I had crystal clear audio of her and Brandon planning the mental competency hearing, and I knew she had masterminded at least half their schemes. I just gave a slow, deliberate nod. Go on, I said. I can testify, she whispered, leaning across the greasy table. I can tell the federal agents everything. I know where he hid the cash from the early private sales. I know the details of the offshore accounts he tried to open. I can give them a roadmap that will bury him forever. And what do you want in return, Tiffany? I asked. I want out, she said. I want you to talk to the prosecutors, tell them I'm cooperating, and help me get an immunity deal. She hesitated, the greed still lurking behind her fear like a shadow. And I need cash, she added, just enough to start over. 50,000. It's nothing to you now. You have tens of millions. Give me 50 grand, and I'll hand you your son on a silver platter. I looked at her, the woman who had stood at an altar and promised to love and cherish my son, who had lived in my home, eaten at my table, and called me Dad whenever she wanted a new car. Now she was selling her husband out for the price of a mid-sized sedan. You're offering to destroy Brandon to save yourself, I clarified. You're offering to send the man you married to federal prison so you can walk away. He's going to prison anyway, she snapped, her voice rising sharply. Why should I go down with him? He's a complete loser, Tom. You know he is. He's never earned a single dollar on his own in his entire life, and he gambled our whole future away. He dragged me into this mess. I'm the victim here. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and set it face down on the table. Is that your final offer? I asked. You trade Brandon for $50,000 and a good word with the prosecutor. Yes, she said eagerly. Yes, just give me the money. I picked up the phone and pressed stop on the recording app. "I didn't bring any money, Tiffany," I said. Her face turned pale instantly. What? What do you mean?" "I didn't offer anything," I corrected her. "I was just listening, and I've heard quite enough." I stood up, dropping a $5 bill on the table for the coffee. "You're a witness, Tom," she hissed, grabbing my sleeve with a desperate grip. "You heard what I said. We had an agreement." "We didn't agree to anything," I said, pulling my arm free firmly. "We just had a conversation. And now I'm going to share it with the only other person who needs to hear it." I walked out of the diner into the cool night air, which felt incredibly refreshing after the suffocating toxicity of that booth. Sitting in my car, I opened the audio file, quickly trimming out the silent pauses to leave only her voice, her betrayal, and the price tag she had put on his head. I saved the file, opened my messaging app, found Brandon's contact, and attached the audio. He was staying in a cheap motel near the airport due to the restraining order, keeping him away from the mansion, likely sitting there, terrified and sweating, while waiting for his wife to return with a solution. I typed a short message to go with the file. "She thinks you're worth $50,000, son. Thought you should know." I hit send, watching the progress bar fill up until it marked "Delivered the engine." I started the engine, but I didn't drive away just yet. I waited. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Tiffany. I declined the call instantly. Then came a text from Brandon, a string of unhinged, furious curses aimed at her. Then came a second text from him. "She's dead to me." I put the phone down. The alliance was shattered. The two people who had plotted to ruin my life were now officially at each other's throats. They wouldn't have the time or energy to come after me anymore. They'd be too busy tearing each other apart. I drove back to the hotel, feeling a heavy weight in my stomach. It wasn't guilt. It was just the somber realization that everything was truly coming to an end. I had cut their final bond, ensuring that when they faced the judge, they'd be sitting at separate defense tables with two completely different lawyers. They'd offer wildly conflicting testimony, utterly destroying each other's credibility on the stand. It was the most effective legal strategy money could buy. And it cost me nothing more than a single cup of coffee. Driving through the quiet city streets, I couldn't help but think back to their wedding day. I remembered the way Brandon looked at her as she walked down the aisle. So happy, so devoted. He had no idea he was marrying a mercenary, and I had no idea I was raising an irredeemable fool. I parked the car, headed up to my room, and took care of one last piece of business by calling Prescott. "Arthur," I said, "I just sent you an audio file." "Got it," Prescott replied. "That's cold, Thomas." "It was necessary," I said firmly. "Hand it over to the district attorney. Let them know Ms. Dawson reached out to me directly, attempting to solicit a bribe in exchange for testimony. It speaks volumes about her character, and it'll kill any plea deal she tries to negotiate. You're making sure she goes down right alongside him," Prescott noted. "Arthur, she was the one who came up with the plan to put me away in a facility," I reminded him. "She wanted to lock me up for the rest of my life. I'm just returning the favor." "Understood," Prescott said. "I'll file it first thing in the morning." I hung up and poured a glass of water, my hands steady. The house of cards had completely collapsed, leaving me with nothing left to do but clear away the debris. Yet I knew my son. I knew Brandon. He was weak, yes, but he was also deeply impulsive and destructive. He had lost the fortune he coveted, his freedom, and now his wife's loyalty. He had nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. I walked over to the hotel room door, checked the deadbolt, clicked the latch into place, and wedged a heavy wooden chair firmly under the handle. It was an old instinct, a habit born of survival. I had a feeling I'd be needing it very soon. Brandon wasn't the type to go quietly into the night. He was going to explode. And I was sitting right at ground zero. The next morning, I sat in a high-backed leather chair in Arthur Prescott's 42nd floor office. From up here, the city below looked small and manageable, and I wished my life felt the same way. Prescott paced the floor nervously, holding a tablet, his face completely pale. "Thomas, have you seen the news?" he asked. I shook my head. I had no interest in the headlines. I just wanted to sign the final trustee affidavit and sleep for a week. Brandon went back to the motel, Prescott said, his voice shaking slightly. He put Tiffany in the hospital. I froze, the pen hovering in midair. "Is she alive?" I asked. "She's in critical condition," Prescott said. "Severe injuries, broken jaw, fractured ribs." He attacked her brutally, Thomas, then took off. The police have issued a statewide APB for him. They consider him armed and extremely dangerous. I slowly set the pen down on the desk. "He isn't running," I said quietly. Prescott looked at me, stunned. "What?" "He isn't running," I repeated. "He has nowhere to go. He has no money, no passport, and no friends." "Then where is he?" "He's on his way here," I said. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because he believes I'm the root cause of every single problem in his life." I stood up, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the skyline below. "He thinks, if he cuts off the head, the rest of it falls apart. He's coming to finish this once and for all." "How would you like to handle the final confrontation with Brandon?"